Hello, everyone. And on our panel today, we will be talking about the National Framework for Web 3.0. With me, I have first Dr. Charles Clancy. He is a Senior Vice President and General Manager at an organization called MITRE Labs. He'll tell us a little bit about what they do. His background is deep in engineering and telecom, cybersecurity, national security. He was at Virginia Tech for a number of years and ran their Center on National Security and Cybersecurity in the United States. And he started out his career at the National Security Agency. I should say that the next person on the panel really needs no introduction. Allyson Maynard, Allyson Maynard-Gibson is renowned in the Bahamas, but throughout the world globally as being a technology soothsayer, I would say. She served in the Bahamas twice as the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, and in addition as the Minister of Financial Services and Investment. Currently, she is back to being an attorney and advising a lot of people in this space. She runs the digital assets and financial services practice at a firm in the Bahamas. And most importantly, for our lawyers out there, she is Queen's Counsel, which is sort of the Oscars of law, given to the top advocates in law in barristers. And then we have honored to have a minister from the Bahamian government with us today as well. Michael Halkitis is the Minister of, make sure I get, there's too many minister titles here, so I want to make sure I get this one right. But the Minister of Economic Affairs?
Economic Affairs.
Yes, okay. He is the Minister of Economic Affairs. And he is very well known for leading the digitization charge through the government. Works and focuses on areas in financial services, obviously technology, tax reform, has been a leader of a lot of the tax reform throughout the Bahamas during his government service, cybersecurity, consumer protection, and he'll speak to us today about a few of the things that the Bahamas has been doing to lead in the Web 3.0 space. So I'll start, Minister, I'll start with you. On Monday, we had FTX breaking ground on their new headquarters here. And this was something where they cited the friendly regulation in the Bahamas. Some folks would say that means no regulation. But at Deltec, we're very familiar with everything that the Bahamas does in regulation. You have a world-renowned Central Bank of the Bahamas, which ran one of the leading world conferences on KYC and AML back in January here, with people coming throughout the world. You have the Securities Commission of the Bahamas, and then all of the different legislation you have put in place, the Sand Dollar, the DARE Act. But tell us a little bit about last week's announcement on the white paper on the future of digital assets in the Bahamas.
First of all, we were very, very excited at the groundbreaking, extremely pleased to have a company of the caliber of FTX to have chosen the Bahamas as its headquarters, and extremely pleased to have their commitment to encourage other companies in that space to come here. And as you said, one of the key points of attractiveness of the Bahamas is, number one, we have a long-standing reputation as a well-regulated jurisdiction that is compliant and has always sought to be compliant with global financial, prudential, and regulatory standards. And we are very proud of our central bank to have pioneered the first digital currency, and we're very proud of our Securities Commission of the Bahamas to have shepherded and conceived and shepherded through realization the digital assets, the DARE Act, and that was cited by FTX as one of the key reasons they came here, because of our regulation. Because of this segment of the industry is so important, the government of Bahamas thought it prudent to publish a white paper which will promote national as well as international, of course, discussion on the whole area of digital assets. And the key points for discussion and the key objectives of the white paper were to explore new opportunities within the digital asset space, to encourage innovation in fintech and other areas of digital assets, to improve the attractiveness of the Bahamas as a destination for other companies involved in the digital asset space. We want to encourage the building of capacity amongst our regulators, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the Securities Commission of the Bahamas, in improving their level of regulation. We also want to promote the development of skills and trainings amongst the population, amongst our professionals, so that they can easily transition from perhaps other segments of the financial services industry into the digital asset space. And connected to that is we want to explore any linkages between what we call the traditional financial services and digital assets, fintech, crypto. So the idea is to create that discussion. We recognize that we are a leading jurisdiction in terms of regulation and attractiveness. We want to maintain that position, and we believe that we do so by encouraging discussion.
Mrs. Gibson, so you have...
I just want to highlight one more thing, if I may, on the white paper.
Yes, yes.
And I think the private sector should be really thrilled that the government has actually institutionalized the means by which the private sector would be consulted and constantly get feedback as to what is happening in the sector, what needs to be changed, what needs to be tweaked. You know, it's a really fast-moving sector, and the government has actually institutionalized the means by which the private sector can formally give feedback. And then there's also by establishing a committee, and the chair of that committee will be on a national committee that is also has on it that the Prime Minister is the chair of as Minister of Finance, together with the regulators as well. So there are two means by which the government has institutionalized the means for the private sector to feed into making sure that the Bahamas stays on the cutting edge.
Well, this sort of private and public sector engagement that is, through the white paper, going to be institutionalized in the Bahamas is not unusual for the Bahamas to lead in that way and to take that approach of working with the private sector closely. You have decades of government experience, but now you're in more of the private space side. You helped FTX exchange come here, become the first registered exchange under the DARE Act. So talk a little bit about that experience of attracting companies to the Bahamas, explaining what the Bahamas has, and what could not just the Bahamas, but other governments grappling with the framework for Web3 2.0. What could they be doing to help attract companies?
Okay, so thank you for that question. FTX, Sam has spoken about this many, many times, formally engaged an entity to examine countries around the world to determine which country had the best framework for FTX to move to, if it were to move its world headquarters. When it opened an office, it didn't decide that it would actually move its world headquarters. And it analyzed many, many things, political stability, all the usual things, quality of life, etc. But one of the things that Sam said that really, really caused him to sort of cross the finish line was that it struck FTX and its advisors how close the regulators and the policymakers work in collaboration. It was really clear that the government was very determined that this sector is going to be a means by which the quality of life of our people is transformed, and it was also going to make sure that people understand that the Bahamas is very serious about this space being a cutting-edge space for the Bahamas, and we lead the world on Web3, and how do we stay there and move into this rapidly changing arena and stay on the cutting edge and be the front runner. I think a few things that the government has to, they say don't rest on your laurels, we have to keep it in mind and keep out there. one of the things is ease of doing business. Wherever people come, they want to be comfortable that it's easy to do business. I think that the governments, and our government in particular, needs to move more towards a check-the-box way of doing things, so that if people should know clearly what needs to be done, and once the boxes are checked, you just move on. AI analyzes applications and so forth, and you just get approved. We were just speaking on the FTX stage about decisions being made on the blockchain in 4 seconds as opposed to 2 days. That's the kind of arena we need to keep moving into. I want to also highlight education, education, education. We need to make sure that we have a deep bench of people, intellectual capital, national and international, in the Bahamas that can continue to innovate and make it very clear that this is the place that welcomes innovation in the technological space. This also means that we have to also, I think, magnify the way that we don't work in silos. We actually are very comfortable with integration of all people who need to be involved in the space, coming together. That's how you get the best ideas in any sphere. So not working in silos. We don't solve problems by being in silos. Let's work together.
And I think we're seeing that problem with a lot of different governments, that a very siloed approach in different agencies to Web 3.0.
Right. I just want to add one more thing to that, and I think that Charles is going to talk about this a lot because I know when I'm speaking with him, he has strong feelings about it. And I think it's important to really make a broadband, mobile broadband, accessible to everyone, and the same way that we have certain objectives, that by certain timelines we would want certain things to happen in the world, the SDGs, for example, Agenda 2030, we should actually have deadlines by which we will make sure that everybody has access, easy access to mobile broadband. That's essential for Web3.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, Dr. Clancy, the digital, I'm skipping off of what Mrs. Gibson just said, but the digital divide is something that you've worked closely with in telecom. Let's just jump to a question that's not on the prep list. On that, tell me a little bit about what you see as the big telecom challenge for Web 3.0 and how we are going to be able to work with governments to solve some of this.
Well, I think there's a couple different layers of the telecom challenges. I mean, Web3 is this interesting confluence of telecom and finance to create sort of entirely new digital economies. And so if you think about the dependence on telecommunications infrastructure, one, you need connectivity, right? So you talk about the digital divide where you've got parts of the world that are highly connected and others that are not. And your ability to interact with Web3 and these digital economies will be predicated on having broadband. Right, so in the United States, as part of the infrastructure bill passed in the last year, there's been, I think, $45 billion in investment for really investing in U.S. broadband infrastructure, which is really a prerequisite for the necessary connectivity to participate in these digital economies. And on top of that, there's a whole additional set of things that need to happen. I mean, again, in the United States, we have the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission as sort of the primary telecom regulators. But then you have a whole separate set of financial regulation that's independent. And so I think as we begin to think through how these two worlds collide, we need a systematic approach that figures out how all these different regulatory organizations fit together.
Mm-hmm. And is it easier for a smaller country like the Bahamas then to be a little more nimble in tackling all of these issues? Because is it easier not to have things siloed? So how do you work, Minister, how do you work in the government to ensure that things don't get siloed into little, we have this in the United States, these agencies want ownership of certain things.
I think what might be more sort of as a determining factor in the depths or the entrenchment of those silos is the length of time and the reliance on how things have always been done, and this is the way we've done it. So no matter what size you are,
yes,
you have to convince the users and the stakeholders and the potential users that there's a better way, there's a faster way, there's a more effective way. Technology, Web 3.0, 3.0 provides it. Here are some examples of processes that have been changed and results that have been improved, and we want to adopt it on a wider scale. So I think it's a matter of, yeah, we're small, but I think we have to be able to convince by demonstration that we need to have some disruption in some of the age-old processes that we have if we want to improve things like more effective delivery of service, ease of doing business, etc.
I don't think we have to convince anybody. I think that the government needs to be convinced. I think that the consumers are already there. And if we think about young people and people working in this space, they're already there. I mean, there's no fear at all about the use of technology. We just had, like I said, another session where they were talking about everything can be on a decentralized blockchain. You don't need to have a centralized database. People are already there. And so if we're going to be, and as we are going to be serious about this space, we just simply have to do it. Let's get the Nike swoosh out and just do it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about MITRE, because it's a really unique organization. It's a nonprofit in the United States, but you advise a lot of governing agency, do a lot of R&D. I'd recommend everybody go to the MITRE website. They put out white papers on different topics that are key to the Web 3.0 space, some of the deepest thinking happening. But you work with different agencies, like, for example, the IRS, I know, is one that you've worked with. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in this space and also what you see coming in the next year.
Yeah, so MITRE is a nonprofit that operates federally funded research and development centers. So we have this sort of unique non-conflict of interest role in helping bring technical experts to the government to address a whole range of problems. And so we're a team of roughly 8,000 scientists and engineers working on a whole myriad of issues across the board. And it's been interesting to watch sort of the blockchain, crypto, and Web3 really kind of work its way through the government consciousness over the last 5 years. I'd say much of our early work was trying to help federal agencies figure out whether or not blockchain as a component technology was useful in solving a problem that they had, whether it was a cybersecurity problem or a data problem or something like that. There's a lot of hype around blockchain as a component technology. From there, it really then moved into concerns around illicit finance and working with federal law enforcement to even, for example, have the tools necessary to seize crypto wallets as part of asset seizures. And how do you do that? And what are the tools necessary to accomplish that? And then as it's matured, now we're starting to, again, we operate an R&D center for the IRS and more broadly the Treasury. And there we're seeing how do we deal with tax compliance issues and how do we begin to mechanize a lot of that as more of those challenges will emerge with DeFi. And then going even further than that, we're looking at the broader Web3 landscape. What does the appropriate policy and regulatory environment look like? What are the national security concerns? How do we deal with things like climate issues, equity issues? This administration is very focused on equity, so there's an equity lens applied to most all policy decision making to ensure that the policy decisions being made are going to help address the breadth of society rather than just sort of niche components.
And from a comparative point of view, because you are based in the United States, but I'm assuming you look at the frameworks and what's going on in other countries. So are you seeing different models about how governments are approaching Web 3.0? What do you see as, from someone watching in the United States, it seems almost chaotic from a lawyer's perspective, trying to advise clients before I joined Deltec, just the amount of, I would call it regulatory grabs was from our perspective. Are you seeing that in other countries as well?
So I think most of the energy right now is primarily focused in the financial space, right? And so, I mean, the title of this panel is Web3, and so I guess what I would observe is there's a whole much bigger picture of Web3 from a regulatory perspective that we're not even really thinking about yet, right? And so, arguably, much of the U.S. regulatory infrastructure in things like social media is built around Web 1 technology, right? The so-called Section 230 that has certainly been popularized by Twitter and Elon and others, is is really the guiding light for how we handle social media, and that was a Web 1.0 era ruling. We never really caught up to Web 2.0, and now we just heard discussions earlier about decentralized social and having social media checked into blockchains and micropayment transactions for liking tweets, which is, again, a really interesting use case for Web 3. To what extent does any of our thinking about the policy and regulatory space hasn't even remotely caught up to that? So I would say we're starting to see some common views internationally around within the financial space. But I'd say as you look at other use cases of Web3 outside crypto and finance, DeFi, it's still the wild, wild west.
And Mrs. Gibson, we were talking about this in preparation for our panel, and you made this point that governments need to be ahead of the industry, almost. Like that we need to be thinking about everything that has to come together to support this, because we haven't been great at supporting Web 1.0, Web 2.0 fully. So how much investment should a government be spending this? And this is maybe for the minister as well. How much time and investment on all the Web 3.0? So the telecom, the digital divide that we talked about, financial literacy, which is a huge part of it that you touched on. Being inviting to businesses and economic development in there as well. And now Dr. Clancy mentions the social media parts. Data is going to be a big part of it. So all of this, how much time is the government do you think the government, you may not be able to answer that, but as a city minister, but it seems like this is almost an unending focus for the governments.
It is an unending focus. We currently have a project, a digitization project, $30 million project that is promoting digitization across government ministries and departments. Of course, it's not enough, but like Mrs. Maynard-Gibson said, the demand for the public is now on. They want to get their services digitally. They want to pay. They want to make application. They want to pay. They want to provide information, and so that again provides an opportunity for us. We can look at what we're doing now as a pilot, but with the understanding that this is the way that the world is moving. The ongoing pandemic has magnified the need to be able to do business digitally. It has provided opportunities for entrepreneurs to take advantage of it. And so I can't put a figure on it, but definitely it becomes a huge part of the consideration of the government when we are thinking, particularly in the Bahamas, where we're a far-flung country, but we need to deliver services of equal quality and magnitude to our citizens dispersed throughout the country. This provides an opportunity for us to do it in an effective and more cost-efficient way.
And again, not siloed. I mean, our government is really, really good about welcoming PPPs. And I don't want us to forget that we have a network of fiber optic cables on the seabed in the Bahamas, probably more than any other archipelago in the world. And so it is possible through PPPs to work together to make sure that these services are provided so that not just our people, which is the most important thing from a government standpoint, are able to get their services so effectively and quickly provided, but also innovators and the tech from around the world is attracted to the Bahamas as a location from which they, like FTX, can change the world right here from the Bahamas, because we have the capacity, we have the capability, we have the willingness, and most importantly, the willingness to listen. And so things can happen with the private sector.
Well, and Dr. Clancy, how in the United States do you deal with sort of the politicization of everything that is occurring? So we hear hearings on TV about Web 3.0 and different things, and apparently I am the supporter of gun runners and sex traffickers. That's my main 100% job as somebody active in the blockchain industry, according to some senators, which is a very politicized approach and seems very different than the Bahamas. We never hear this divide of being against the technology. We see this embrace of the technology. In the US, it's a little different. We have all these factions. And that's not unusual of a number of other countries. So we have Russia banning and China banning. crypto mining. How do you see getting past that in countries that are dealing with it?
Well, I think you have to separate some of the loudest personalities from just the breadth of people who are supportive of it. So certainly there are some vocal people in the mix, I would say, from a U.S. political perspective. But I would say that by and large, there's interest in moving forward productively. I mean, there are a range of issues like climate and things like that that we talked about that need to be thought through as part of a U.S. policy. There's also sort of fundamental questions about sort of top-down approaches like a CBDC versus more bottom-up and leveraging all the activity that's happening already. And those are sort of ongoing discussions that are happening, certainly as instigated by the executive order that came out 6 or 7 weeks ago. So I think there's going to be a lot of productive conversation that comes out of that will lead to, fingers crossed, some consensus around, and it's not so much whether we will or we won't, it's more the pace at which I'd say the policy evolves to meet the needs.
Well, you touched on one of the problems that's related to the industry overall, which is the impact on climate change, particularly with crypto mining. And Minister, I'm going to direct this to you, because this is dear to the heart of anyone in the Bahamas. The impact of Hurricane Dorian in 2019 devastated the Bahamas with the direct hit that was taken up by many of the islands. Your Prime Minister last week tabled a proposed bill on climate change and carbon markets, I believe it's the title of it. And part of it is proposing for the Bahamas creating a carbon credit exchange here, which is, I think, really unique. I don't know that I've seen another government actually come out and propose that approach. So tell us a little bit about how this idea came about and worked its way up.
Well, definitely we have been impacted by climate change for decades. We didn't know it as climate change at the time. It was, the hurricane season that every so often would wreak havoc. And as a government or governments, you have to rebuild your infrastructure, and it causes an accumulation of debt. And so we have been impacted. We've not had a very big carbon footprint, but we've been feeling the effects of what other people have done to cause climate change. The discussion has accelerated over recent years, and when this administration came in, we were speaking with some professionals who opened our eyes to the virtue of our protected areas here in the Bahamas as carbon sinks, carbon sequesters. And we advanced the discussions, and it became a very real reality that we can monetize some of these national assets in terms of the carbon sequestration. And the idea from the Prime Minister was, okay, how do we go from not just a one-time realization of a fee, but an ongoing contribution to our national finances to help to mitigate the effects of climate change and to do other things like, for example, integrate it into your financing when you go to the financial markets, and how do you use that to lower your cost of financing. And so the idea came about of, okay, we have FTX here, who's one of the largest crypto exchanges in the world. Why don't we promote a carbon exchange? And so the idea is, yes, we have these carbon assets that we want to develop. How do we make sure that they continue to generate returns for us into the future? And you do that by establishing a market and, again, becoming the leader in that space.
Well, it's interesting. Yesterday in New York State, the State Assembly passed a moratorium on crypto mining in the state. Now, it still has to go to the other chamber, but it's a 2-year ban on crypto mining for any miners that use carbon-sourced energy. And so, Dr. Clancy, I know you are kind of globally recognized as a leader in climate change policy. Seeing the ban approach here, can you explain sort of this whole where proof of work and proof of stake play into this in mining, and what is the difference between the two? Why does one consume so much energy? Why does one not?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the big criticisms of the whole crypto movement is the energy consumption associated with it. And whether or not you buy that argument or not, I guess is up to you. It depends on. Anyway, I won't get into that. But I would say, as you look at how do we make I'd say DeFi more sustainable, we in general want to reduce the energy consumption. And so as you look at how these consensus algorithms and blockchains work under the hood, you have broadly two types, right? You have proof of work and proof of stake. And proof of work are looking at basically proving the transactional integrity of the network by essentially proving that you can solve hard math problems. And these math problems have been getting progressively harder and harder as Bitcoin in particular has matured and require more and more energy to actually undertake and solve the underlying math problem. Proof of stake is a different approach where the integrity of the system is really buttressed by essentially who owns which stakes, and they're the ones that sort of control the consensus. And so in theory, you get similar security properties, and you can't have someone, say, hijack your blockchain and remove transactions or add fraudulent transactions. Both approaches are sort of technically interesting and important for the underpinnings of this. However, proof of work generally, because of these math problems you're solving, requires computational resources to do so, again, contributing to the energy consumption of the underlying blockchains that support. And so as we look forward, well, there's kind of two approaches. One is you try and make the proof of work, the systems that are implementing the proof of work schemes more energy efficient through sustainable energy and things like that are used to fuel them. And I know we've had conversations about how this is actually creating an economy to help promote green technologies. And so there's some interesting secondary effects that we may see in essentially the economic markets of proof of work crypto helping fuel the development of carbon neutral data centers and things like that. Really interesting to see if that really matures. But then we also have these proof of stake systems, which Ethereum is plans to move from proof of work to proof of stake. And then many of the new layer 1 blockchains that as you heard about in the other stage earlier today are all sort of starting off with proof of stake as the underlying approach that they're using. And so I suspect that Bitcoin, which is really the most, it's the Kleenex of crypto, right? Mm-hmm. It's the brand name everyone knows, mm-hmm. Will continue to use proof of work for the foreseeable future. And because of its market presence, we need to figure out ways to accomplish support and sustain it. And so things like sustainable energy is supporting the mining operations is, I think, going to be a reality moving forward. But then a lot of the really innovative use cases of Web3 are built on top of a lot of these new proof of stake layer 1 blockchains. And so whether it's decentralized social, decentralized gaming, decentralized, all this other interesting stuff is hopefully starting off on the right foot when it comes to sustainability.
Well, we're almost near the end of the panel, and I'm going to ask all three of you the same questions, and I'll start with Mrs. Gibson. I'm handing everybody a magic wand, and this is a very secret magic wand. It allows you to pass a law in every country of the law of your choice. This is a law that would help in some way advance Web 3.0. Everybody is going to adopt it, and everyone is going to implement it consistently. So you don't have to worry about anything like that. Mrs. Gibson, I'll start with you. What law would you put forth to the world?
Yeah, I wave my magic wand to have everybody have access, universal access to mobile, to broadband, mobile or otherwise. And there's a proviso. I would like to see, as we do in the Bahamas, to have the regulators and the policymakers, not just in various territories, but also world regulators and world policymakers in constant dialogue, again, not working in silos, because this is something that is changing the world. So we need to make sure that the regulators and the policymakers, as we do here, are on the same page to make sure that this access to universal broadband actually changes the world, not just people's pockets, but quality of life as well.
I would wave my magic wand and second that motion. And if I would just do an amendment, make sure that everybody, particularly every child, has an instrument on which to connect and have access.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so as the non-lawyer up here,
Yes.
I don't feel qualified to pass a law. As an engineer, though, I have all sorts of technology solutions I would love a magic wand to go fix, right? And so,
Well, one technology solution we'll give you then.
one technology,
One, just
only
one, no,
one.
only one.
Oh. So my background has historically been in cybersecurity, and so as I look at some of the security issues, I would love us to find solutions to some of the underlying cybersecurity challenges that exist today in blockchain. In particular, the ability to get rid of the logic flaws that we find in these smart contracts that are undermining the solvency of many of these DAOs, and really ensure that the solutions we're adopting are truly decentralized, not just distributed. So you actually get the underlying security properties of these promised by a distributed ledger.
All right. Well, I'm going to take my magic wand and pass a financial literacy education law. I think it goes hands in hand with what you're saying. And that's starting in kindergarten, and this is for the unbanked and underbanked. We can give them all these tools, but we need to give them that education as well to really make a change in that. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on the panel. And the panelists will be here today if you want to catch up with them and ask them any more questions.
Thank you.